and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Jeannie Vittoni, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues, Dan Drake, Wendy Conquest, and Tim Stein. Today, we've got a special guest. Her name is Barbara Steffens, and she is a pioneer in this field of betrayal trauma. She has done a lot of research. She is now a retired clinician, retired coach, but she has done so much in this field. She has a book that was actually second edition republished a couple of years ago. Also a founding founding member of ABSATS, which, to remind you all, is the Association of Sex Addiction Partner Specialists. So guys, Barb's going to come on in a minute. What's going on for you guys?
I'm excited to see Barb. It's been a long time, and I've known, I was grateful and fortunate to be on the founding board of ABSATS, so got to see Barb from the beginning, and just she's an amazing pioneer in the field, therapist, coach, and I hope I can say friend, Barb, but I just, she's just an amazing person. So I'm so grateful to learn from her and have her wisdom here.
Yeah, I'm also just thrilled to have her on. I started my CSAT training in 2010 through ITAP, and at that time we were looking at betrayal trauma through a very different lens, almost so a co-addict model. And Barb's work just changed everything around betrayal trauma, and so I just am excited to see her and hear her today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've had the fortune of having my path cross with Barb's on a number of occasions, and what always stands out to me, which I'm sure will come out in our conversation today, is Barb's heart. She has such a beautiful heart when it comes to the work that we do with partners, understanding their experience, but just the work in general and understanding sort of like the struggles that everybody's going through. She's just such a beautiful person. I'm looking forward to being able to have a conversation with her today.
And I feel very fortunate as the current president of ABSATS to have Barb as a resource and a mentor at times, and to be a part of her learning and her teaching has been such a gift to me. So I'm always happy to have more time with Barb. Hey, Barb, come on in, join the conversation. Ta-da!
Oh,
Welcome.
Oh, what
So
guys are.
we are so thankful that you are here and we get to chat and talk about betrayal trauma. And what was actually, I wanted to start, and this came up. Wendy was saying, back in the day of our early training, the co-addict model, codependency model, and things are so different now. But can you kind of maybe share what the landscape was like? Because I know you did your PhD study talking about PTSD. Maybe let's start there. What was the PhD study?
Well, the PhD study was so much fun when you go through a doctorate to get to do a dissertation, but I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do. So I really wanted to find if partners who were betrayed experienced trauma, and if so, to what degree. Because back in the day, every once in a while I would hear the word trauma as it related to the partners, but mostly it was trying to put a partner in a box of being co-addicted or codependent, rather than seeing how they were showing up as trauma symptoms. And I was trained in trauma. My early work was crisis intervention after trauma. So when it showed up with the women I was working with, it was pretty clear. So fast forward, I'm going to go get a doctorate, I'm going to do some research, and looked for trauma, yes or no, and then degrees of trauma in partners after finding out about their loved ones' sexual secrets. And I was sure I was going to find some, but I found that very close to 70% of the people in my study met all the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, some people might say that traumatic event might not be accurate, but ask any partner, did this feel life-threatening for them? So it was. So that just, once that was published and I started to speak, I think the first time I spoke is probably, Dan, when I met you. I don't
Probably.
remember, but it was at a conference, and trying to talk to the community about, let's talk about partners differently. And so I compared the characteristics of co-addiction to the symptoms of trauma and said, we're describing the same person, but this is trauma.
Barb,
So that
I'm
got
just,
us started.
can I
Yeah.
ask you,
Sure.
just speaking on that in a field that wasn't kind of ready for this quite yet, like how was that, if you're okay personally, just bringing something like that? That's a, I don't know if you maybe knew that it would be a difficult thing to bring, or if you did. I'm just curious personally how that was, bringing something that was novel to the field.
As I describe it, my knees were shaking the whole time. The whole time. And I was also at the same time, the first time I spoke was in a larger setting and more generic, and that wasn't nearly as anxiety provoking. But when I spoke in front of sex addiction specialists, it was terrifying. But I just had this sense of this needs to be said, and what do I have to lose? I'm going to step out and say what I found and what the truth is from my perspective. It really helped that there were a lot of people that came up afterwards and said, I've been thinking this for a long time. So that was good. But yeah, it was probably one of the times I was the most anxious yet the most determined to do what I needed to do.
What a beautiful blend of anxious and determined.
Yeah,
And
do
to
it
give
anyway.
context, this is like 2007, 2008 presenting.
2006, because the first article came out in the sex addiction community in 2006.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's probably right around then. I graduated in 2005, and my study was out in 2005.
So Barb, were you the first?
As far as I know, I was the first.
To
There
name it.
was to really name it as trauma in terms of the impact of infidelity, and especially around the point of discovery. I think I was the first one to really name it as trauma.
And
There
Barb,
were other voices talking about sexual trauma, that there was sexual trauma, but I really pointed it out as post-traumatic stress.
right. And I love the way that you framed it as a loved one. You know, a lot of times we say the partner was acting out or the addict was acting out, but that you said when you find a loved one, that's really beautiful. Do you find that is it infidelity? So if someone has a one-time affair versus sex addiction, is there a difference in the traumatic response?
I don't really know that there is a difference. There may be more of a difference in terms of how long the secret was held. So how long perhaps the betrayal was going on and the person didn't know. So that was part of my study, and just looking at, what was the length of time before discovery. Yeah. And the longer that the person had been in the relationship when they found out, the more intense the trauma symptoms. So that length of time in the relationship. When I was doing my research, I found that there wasn't anything, you have to look at current research to support what you're going to be saying. And the only thing that was out there was in the field of infidelity, and they talked about trauma. But in my experience, the longer the infidelity or the secrets were being held, the more damaging and the more traumatic, and the longer the relationship. Did that answer your question, Wendy?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I think it's a piece that might be missed in assessments, is how long to have that perspective of how long the betrayal was going on. I think that disclosure, it can be so powerful and so devastating in that respect, because the partner might be thinking, oh, this was just in the last year or two, and when they find out that potentially it would go through.
Yeah. So the additional trauma there of questioning their whole sense of reality, their perception of who am I, who is this, what is this relationship, who is this person that I love, that I think adds a whole other layer of trauma. for the individual. It's just shattering for them.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. I mean, the longer the relationship, the more that trust has been built
Mhm.
and is the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm hearkening to, this is 2006 we're talking. And here
Mhm.
we are in 2024. And that's what we're working with when folks walk in the room now. It's just the timelessness to
Mhm.
this research, these findings, which has shaped the modality of treatment for betrayed partners.
Yeah. Yeah. The field has really changed, which is a really good thing. It really needed to, because we had this whole set of people that were so wounded and so missed.
Mhm.
And as we know, when you're traumatized and then you go to get help, and the person that you go to get help misses you, or maybe adds something on that feels harmful for you, that contributes to even more trauma. We call that institutional trauma now. So, but it's that seeking help, not being heard and well received, and so there was more harm. That was a really big reason why ABSATS was started, was because we saw this going on and we wanted to start to do things to make it safer and to be more responsive to the needs of the partner rather than adding to the hurt.
Mhm. Mhm. And clarification, ABSATs, as I said
ABSATS.
earlier.
The
So
system.
Dan and Barb were both founding
Yeah.
members, which is super kind of cool for me as a sitting president to have other buddies in the podcast too. And Tim was on the board as well at one point.
Right.
And ABSATs, just to clarify, is a training organization, training coaches and clinicians to work with folks going through this experience, specializing in betrayal trauma,
Mhm.
and teaching other professionals so that we can improve quality of care for betrayed partners and their loved ones out in the
Yeah.
world. So,
And we're
um,
doing it.
and we're doing it. Hey, I
Mhm.
wanted to bring attention to Barb and Marcia Mean's book.
Yeah.
So do you want to give a little bit of what's in this book and how did that come to be?
Oh, goodness. Well, there's a cool story about how it came to be. I was a assistant professor and didn't know I was about to lose my job. But anyway, I was assistant professor. I was answered the phone and it was Marcia Means, who I had met years before. And she said, "Hey, Barbara, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to write it with you or without you. Which would you choose?" So I said, "With, please." So that's how it started. Marcia had read the research and was starting to utilize more of a trauma approach in her work, was ready to write another book because she had written some before, and so I was delighted to work with her to get that book done. So that's how it got started. It was Marcia, but then also once it was out, it was like floodgates opened. I can't even tell you what it was like to receive the emails that I received as soon as it came out, in terms of partners thanking us for it and saying, "I finally am reading something that fits with what I've experienced." And then I would start to hear all the stories of how they weren't responded to well and how they felt missed.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
how
the
it came about.
The title of that book is, for those of you who are just listening, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse. And the title is still the same, right? With the second addiction, or addiction, addition.
Regardless of how many addictions, it's called the same thing. Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, How Partners Can Cope and Heal.
Right.
So it's really about the partner.
Yeah.
There's
I'm just curious, I mean, I would think it'd be powerful for addicts to read that book as well. I
Mhm.
think we talk a lot about addicts having empathy for the partner, and I know working with addicts and partners both, they sometimes they think they are having empathy, but they really don't get it.
Mhm. Yeah,
there's
we
a
encouraged people in the book at the very back. We say for the people who are struggling to start at the very back of the book, because we had stories back there from partners and from people in recovery. And so I think 5 of each, to really talk about what their experience was. And we found those really helpful for the loved one who wanted to know. And then if they had the stamina or the guts for it, to start reading the book, but that certainly would not be an early on easy process. So
but
the
I find
stories in the back,
I
your books, are really helpful for those.
But it's so helpful though, Barb. I refer to, when I'm seeing someone new in recovery, I mean, even new, I think it sets the tone. Yes, it's not easy, it's difficult. They're already dealing with so much, but I think it sets the tone. And I'm going to miss you. You can quote it correctly, but my translation of it is there's a real powerful thing that you say in the book, and it's something to the effect of sobriety is necessary but not sufficient for relational healing. And I think that's so critical, because I want to get that point across to the people I'm working with, because sometimes they may hear in a 12-step group, or they may hear from other therapists or coaches potentially, that my job is to stay sober, stay on my side of the street, clean that up. That's my job. Everything else is kind of your job. And it's not, because that won't heal and restore a relationship. There's more when it comes to relational trauma that we have to address. So I think that's so helpful to give your book and resources to them, so that they understand from the beginning the frame is, yes, sobriety. Let's really shoot for sobriety, and we have to do more to heal the relationship. So that's been really helpful for me to be able to give.
Yeah, good. And that's what's in their stories, is the awareness of that what they were engaged in was not just impacting them negatively once they came to that awareness, but then healing really started to happen for them, and that recovery process when they started to realize the impact of their behaviors and their actions, that they weren't just behaving in isolation. That's the lie, isn't it? That they're just doing what they're doing in isolation. And so it is within a context, and an important context of relationship.
I want to welcome the listeners that we are talking today with Barb Steffens, pioneer in betrayal trauma, and you are currently listening to conversations on sex, addiction, and relationships. Thanks for being with us. And now back to you.
So Barbara, we have come so far, as far as how we approach partners, but also how we approach addicts, and teaching, sensitivity and empathy, and sort of helping couples heal. Where do you see that we still struggle? Where are there still areas, or are there pockets of various communities that we are still working to step in and sort of help sort of make needed change?
Oh, there are several. So first one that pops to my mind right now is, just because where I'm focused is more of our religious communities and faith communities. They're often first responders when a couple is in crisis, an individual's in crisis. And we hear a lot of times that they don't know what they don't know. And so sometimes you really miss the individuals, miss the couple. So we have stories around things not to do, and in things that we can encourage them to do to be a good first responder. So that's one area, just in our communities of faith and religious organizations. The other is I'm so excited seeing the research coming out now about partners and partners' experiences, but they still seem to center around female and Caucasian partners. And so we need so many more studies on what are the similarities and differences based on culture, ethnicity, gender, male or female who has been betrayed. We don't have research there yet. So I think those are our places where you all get to go and do that work and figure it out. But I think that's where we're missing it. We're having a lot of betrayed men who are feeling like when they pick up a book, they have to translate all the pronouns for themselves. And remember, way back in the day, when it was a female struggling with their sexual behaviors, all they could find were books about men who were struggling with their sexual behaviors. And they had to do this process. So I don't want the guys to have to do that. So that's a big one for me in the faith communities. That answer your question, Tim? There's still lots to do, right?
There's always I am learning, especially this week. I've just got all these things on my plate. There's never an end to this work that we do, and I find that frustrating and hopeful at the same time. If somebody is specifically in a faith community, what would you recommend? What can they do to, they're not going to go out and get extensive training most likely. Although I know that AppSats offers that for some faith communities if they would like to. But what's like the basic thing that you would recommend somebody in a faith community to do to at least get the basic information that they need so that they could help whoever shows up in their community that's struggling with this, whether that's the addict or the partner or the couple?
I think if our communities of faith got some basic information on how to be trauma informed, then they're going to be able to apply that to whatever kind of crisis or trauma comes, into their setting or into their community. So being trauma informed is much more about listening and holding space and being with rather than advising or prescribing on what to do. So what I hear is a lot of times if someone goes in and they're in crisis, they're getting prescriptions basically from their first responder. Do this, don't do that, pray about this, rather than, wow, this is really hard. I'm so sorry this happened. What can you tell me about it? What's it like for you? So that time to be able to lean in. And then the second thing would be to know who in your community you can refer them to, who are prepared to deal with the nitty-gritty of what's just happened.
Yeah.
But to be in that position of being a witness to what they experienced and being with them, and then, just being that support person along the way, checking in. That's what they can do. Don't prescribe.
One thing that's coming to my mind, Tim, when you said, our field has changed so much and more people understand about this, I kind of challenge that notion a bit. I think within our sex addiction field,
Yeah,
there's more awareness and understanding of the traumatic impact. But I wonder if therapists, coaches at large, I don't know that that population has necessarily increased their knowledge base and understands that. I still have clients coming in where I was diagnosed bipolar, I was diagnosed borderline, and sometimes people are hurtfully being accused of this. So I would say that's another area.
I think there's a lot of growth that needs to take place. But like I used to hear from other therapists, but also from just people out in the community a lot more about, like, with sex addiction. Well, that's the addiction I want to have. And I don't hear those jokes. I still hear them, but I don't hear them nearly as frequently as I used to, which feels like a shift. And when it comes to partners, even if partners aren't working with a sex addiction or partner betrayal expert, I hear that they're more likely that whoever they're working with is stepping into doing trauma work. They're often missing some of the nuances that go with this. So I agree. I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but I also think that there's been some progress. I don't think we're done with that evolution, but
I was going to say that just as a different podcast we had recently recorded, talking about addiction, about getting someone who has that training.
yeah.
And the same thing for betrayal trauma, that if you think this is you, or you might know someone who this applies to, is when you're seeking a professional, are they trained in this work? Are they trained in betrayal trauma? ABSAT certainly offers that training, but so I feel like the greater field still has some learning to do, which, is one of the reasons we do this podcast for everybody.
Well, and I want to expand that to not just professionals, but I mean, look at, I imagine today we have some, and I don't know if it's sex addiction or infidelity, but something happens and someone in the public eye does something, especially if they're a man, will usually get some character, you'll find a bunch of comments that'll look at characteristics of the partner as to why, and it's Judith Herman talked about this in 90s, whatever it was, about why are we looking at characteristics of perpetration in the victim. And I bet today, if we looked, we could find evidence of this. So I think we still have a bigger cultural shift to do, to not, find explanations for people's behaviors based on the victim. So I think we've shifted. I agree, but I still think we have a long way to go as a whole society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. My concern, one of my jobs for several years was assistant professor doing counselor education. And so when these students are going through their graduate programs to go out and become a counselor or a therapist, they don't have adequate information on addiction. But there's more about that than there would be about any kind of betrayal trauma or infidelity related or sexual trauma even. They don't come out and get licensed with that information unless they get additional training. So it's hard for people to find folks that they can afford or that they know how to look for someone that has a specialty in this. So I think getting into our grad schools is going to be really important to start getting this information earlier so that all of our providers know how to at least initially respond. But right now, they're lucky to get something on addiction, maybe a little bit on sex addiction. But I only know of one chapter about betrayal trauma with partners, and that's because Janice and I wrote it, and it's in one textbook. So that's Janice Cottle. So there's a big need there.
Yeah, I took a 2-unit. I only had in my grad school program, I had a 2-unit addictions class. And I don't think sex addiction was ever even discussed, even mentioned at all, ever, if I remember right.
Yeah, wasn't in any of mine. I would be the one to bring it up when I was teaching.
I think this is common in our field where there's so much to be done. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of progress in the last 20 odd years. And there's so much to do still.
Yeah.
Which I think, Tim, you said it, like overwhelming, invigorating, hopeful, and a lot to do.
And on that, Tim, can I even say, I mean, I think it's even hard. We have more resources than ever to find good specialists, but I think it's difficult because I can sign up for some, marketing system and have a checkbox. Yes, I specialize in sex addiction, but that doesn't mean I've done any training. It just means, oh, I'm opening myself to a market of people. So I think it's hard, I think, for consumers to find, good, helpful support that is specialized in this. And that's why AppSats has a whole directory to understand, these are the people that have been trained and certified to work with betrayal trauma and treat it effectively.
Yeah, I guess the advice I would give is if you're a consumer out there and you're looking for a therapist and you go to one of those therapist websites where they're all listed and you see a therapist who has almost every specialty checked.
It might be a flag.
Might be a giveaway, yeah.
They're not the person you should see. If you've got somebody like I do sex addiction work, I can do trauma work and I can do depression work and anxiety, but when you find somebody like this is my specialty, go see them.
Barb, I have a question for you. So when I was doing groups with partners, I was very, very curious if the trauma would be the same if their loved one was solely watching pornography versus what we call crossing the flesh line, actually being with women. And in my very, very small sample, I found that the trauma was absolutely the same. Can you speak? Yeah.
Absolutely the same. It really depends on the meaning of it for them.
Yeah.
And it's less about the behavior, although the behaviors matter. And, doing disclosures, you find out big time that the behaviors matter. But it's the level of deception and the betrayal, much more so than the kind of behavior the person was engaging in. It's the fact that I didn't know, that they lied to me, that they kept it from me. And it's that I didn't pick up on it. Or maybe I did, and I asked about it, but then I was lied to again. So it's that experience of, I asked you, and now you are lying to my face and telling me no, when my gut is screaming something's going on. So they start to discount their own sense of perception and don't trust their gut anymore.
Well,
so it really does not matter the kind of behavior. And if it is a behavior, that can be different depending on, if you have 8 people in a group, it's 8 different kinds of behaviors. That's the worst thing for them.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you, Barb,
of it.
Oh, sorry, Barb.
Yeah.
I was going to thank you for being here today. As we're wrapping up, I wanted to say your book is Your Sexually Addicted Spouse. And is there any sort of final closing thoughts about betrayal trauma that you would like to share with people?
I guess if this is you, this has happened to you. There are so many wonderful people who understand and get it, who want to be available to help you, at least initially, or steer you to the people that can. AppSets is one of those places. I always promote AppSets. That organization can steer you where you need to go, but you are not alone.
Thank
You
you.
are not.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today, spending your time with us. It's a pleasure to always have you some time with you. To our listeners, thank you for being here and listening. And if you enjoyed today, please like, please subscribe, do all the things that Tim Stein tries to remind me to tell people to do. And Tim, if they have a question or comment, what is our mailbag email address?
They should send us an email at conversations.sar@gmail.com, and we will include that in one of our mailbag episodes.
Exactly. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Everyone.
Barb.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Barb.